and Renaissance mind, a book was a type of sacred object, a sacred object in which the spiritual imagination is manifested and materialized, a venerated object that, well, before the invention of the printing press may have been labored over for years or even decades. A book was a great work of art, a work of art that would improve the world and the universe in some way. And in its pages, one might read the mind of the divine. Now, after the Bible, medieval compilations filled with mythographic texts would be among the first to go into print. For example, Abracus's Liber, which goes into 10 editions, starting in around 1480 or so. Now, or Apollodorus's Bibliotheca, which then becomes the classical authority. This is post-1555. Now, copies of the Bibliotheca are handcrafted and made in Antwerp and Paris. These books feature amazingly beautiful woodcut illustrations of the Greek gods and goddesses that have a distinctly Nordic flavor, and might be illustrating the Gothic romances of chivalry instead of mythology. Now, perhaps the greatest and most influential of these mythographic medieval collections is Boccaccio's Genealogia Diorum, or the genealogy of the gods, which would hold sway over the imaginations of poets, writers, and artists for several centuries. Boccaccio spent the last 25 years of his life, around 1350 to 1375 or so, working on, this first true systematic effort to map mythological territory. And Boccaccio mixes rashness with caution. Boccaccio looks underneath the ridiculous Dark Age surface tradition that all the classical gods were demons, and tries to find what truth has been hidden over the centuries. And yet he stays within the medieval literary framework established by Pope Gregory and looks for a polarity of lessons. For example, when Perseus slays the Gorgon, the Medusa, in a Christian moral sense, it is a victory of virtue over vice. In the allegorical sense, the human mind or soul rises up from the mundane delights of the material world, and now turns towards the celestial delights instead. So allegory can be very interesting, folks. Now, on the cautious side, and mindful of church scrutiny, Boccaccio also links the myth to the ascent of Christ. The ascent of Christ to God the Father through the conquest of darkness and death itself. The literary genius picks up his information from just about any place he can, and the text features different levels and traditions. So much so that the fullness of Boccaccio's information, combined with his poetic prose, prolongs the book's life well into the 17th century. Illustrated books, to some degree, are responsible for the graphic diffusion and the favorite themes of the Renaissance. For example, the rape of Europa, or the rape of Proserpina, which are very popular subjects. This classical sacred story is reworked over and over again. Now, for those of you who don't know, Zeus sees Europa when she's playing with her companions on the seashore. Zeus becomes filled with desire for her, so he turns himself into a beautiful bull. The bull approaches Europa, and with its gentleness entices her to climb on its back. At once, the bull makes off with her, plunges into the sea, and swims to Crete. Well, once he gets to Crete, Zeus makes love to her, to Europa, or rapes Europa. There's a variation in the myth. Europa then bears Zeus 3 children, one of which would be the future King Minos. Now, by the end of the 15th century, this Gothic Christian vision of the Greco-Roman pagan world would capture the imagination of European women who loved the lurid and exotic or erotic imagery and want to read the classical myths, legends, and fables in translation, their own vernacular languages. For example, you have Le Epistole de Ovidio, which is printed in Naples around 1478, and the Metamorphosis, which is printed in Venice around 1483. By then, the discovery of genuine antiquity has started in Italy and elsewhere in Europe. Archaeology, the harvesting of Greek and Roman artifacts and ruins. Now, wealthy collectors fill their notebooks with copies of medals, inscriptions, and fragments of statues. This antiquarian trend is combined with the courtly one in a strange, splendid, mysterious hybrid work, the Hibernario-Tomachia Polyphili. Whew, that's a mouthful. Published by Aldist in 1499. This book is a love story with enigmatic overtones and a repertory of classical references. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Aldist did more than just about anybody to make the Greco-Roman classics available to the educated reading public. Essentially, he's responsible, or partly responsible, for the very foundation of the Renaissance. His Venetian publishing house crafts distinctive, well-designed books that set a standard for beautiful printing, and many have survived to this very day. Aldis's first love is Greek, and he publishes around 150 editions between 1495 and 1515, and sometimes even rescues text from obscurity or even possible, permanent loss. He also loves Latin and has a remarkable lifelong commitment, a commitment that inspires others. And plenty of his friends and associates help Aldist edit. Some of the greatest scholars of the day are his buddies. And Aldist's books, The Sign of the Dolphin and Anchor, becomes the most important publishing center in Europe during the Renaissance. Now, another category of illustrated book that generates a lasting tradition are the emblems. Well, what is an emblem? Well, it's antique classical medals and hieroglyphs with archaeological roots that were now decipherable. People could understand them, at least since 1419. With the emblems, the humanists believe that they have found the key to a type of sacred language. They formulate cryptograms of their own. They fabricate cryptograms of their own and draw material from various classical sources and anthologies. Now, the first collection of emblems appears in 1531. Andrea Alatetti, I believe his name is. This is the gods. In the text, the gods, the heroes, the figures, and their attributes are implemented as signs. These signs cover moral and spiritual truths, known as wise maxims. The emblems, or symbolic figure or representation, pictorial design essentially, with an elusive meaning is inserted or cast into the visible device, the work of art. The emblems provide a perfect medium for compromise, and they provide the medium to reconcile pagan myth with Christian teaching. Now, the most common and simple of these emblems can be found in the Christian church. For example, the chalice, that equals the Eucharist. The circle in a triangle, that equals the co-equality and co-eternity of the Trinity. The dove equals the Holy Spirit. A lamb, fish, or pelican equals Christ. Now, this mysticism finds its way into Christian art and fully develops in the High Middle Ages, especially the extensive use of heart symbolism. this Christian imagery modeled on the symbolism of love. In this case, the flaming and pierced heart of Christ, Mary, and the saints. Well, this spiritual concept can be found in Judaism and Islam as well, where the heart is the seat of love, contemplation, compassion, and spirituality. Now, by 1550, in Italy, for example, mythology has invaded public and private places, even fountains, gardens, and churches. And the role of myth is not simply decorative, but imaginary, with various currents of thought involved. The medieval framework may still be in